Kiri, welcome to Stratably TV.
Hi, Russ. Great to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. I'm excited to turn the tables on you. You're usually the one that gets to ask me the tough questions on your podcast, but now I get to pepper you with some questions on some of your recent research. So thanks so much for taking the time today.
Great to be here. I think we're at a ratio of about 3-1 at this point, so maybe making up for lost time.
Yeah, I'll try to catch up over the next year. But for those watching, I reached out to Kiri to talk about retail media, and she, along with her colleague Matteo Bizan, did a really cool study on this part of the world of e-commerce. And for those that follow Stratably closely, you know how pumped up I get when I start talking about retail media with smart people like Kiri. So very excited for the conversation. Kiri, you're head of retail marketplace strategy at Acadia, but that's a very new role for you as you were founder and CEO of Bobsled Marketing, a digital agency that helps brands sell on marketplace channels. And you did such an incredible job with Bobsled in building a very valuable business that Acadia recently acquired Bobsled just a couple of months ago. So many congrats on that acquisition.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it was a really exciting event to be able to join Acadia. It's a fairly new agency, but it's an agency full of really talented people across search, media, social, analytics, and bringing retail media and marketplaces together was sort of the final piece of the puzzle. So found a really great home, and now I'm excited to get back to doing more of this stuff, more of the research and education.
And part of Bobsled's success was that you are just very prolific from a research perspective. You write for Forbes, you have your own podcast where I think you're published every week. You're very active on social. You're like a content machine, and you really help push the industry forward. And I think you've always taken the approach of adding value to this digital commerce community, and it really shows. And the most recent big study that you did, and why I invited you to chat, as I mentioned earlier, is around retail media, and more specifically, how advertisers allocate budget across retail media today. And importantly, you've developed a new framework for thinking about allocating budget going forward. Now, we've linked to the report so those watching can really dive into it if they haven't seen it already. But let's start out just by understanding what made you undertake this project in the first place.
Yeah, well, it was certainly driven by listening to our clients and to the market, and just seeing this sort of proliferation of retail media networks, and a lot of brands getting concerned about keeping up, and this sort of sense of FOMO almost of if I don't invest in these new channels, am I missing something? Am I leaving something behind? So that was one piece of it, is this proliferation of options and the FOMO from that. What if I miss out on the next big thing? That's one piece. But then there's also the very real issue that's persisted for a long time around how to allocate budget between your existing retail media accounts. And those can be traditional retailers now that have stood up their own retail media platforms like Walgreens and Albertsons. So they're all sort of asking for budget as well. Brands have been struggling with that question for a long time of how do we allocate, and it's sort of not becoming any easier as there's more and more options out there.
And what retail media networks did you study as a part of this research paper?
So in a sense, the model that we came up with, which I'm sure we're going to talk about, is pretty agnostic as to the retailer or to the platform, in that it's the idea is that each retail media platform, or even social advertising platforms or search platforms, have a universe of ad types, of targeting options, and each of those ad types and targeting options play a very have a very specific use case. They could be more discovery oriented and help with awareness. They could be helping in sort of more of the consideration stage of the purchase journey. And there's some ad types like Amazon sponsored products, which are just really good at converting on a sale straight away. And every media platform has that kind of assortment of options. So the concept is agnostic. We, just for the purpose of keeping things simple for us and in a language that we felt we understood very well, we just mapped out what those options looked like for Amazon, Walmart, and Instacart. Those are the platforms that we manage advertising on every day for our clients. So we kept our sort of universe illustration of the framework to those three retailers.
And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because those are, three of the, certainly the biggest. But to your point, the framework is agnostic, and you could plug in, whether it's, Ulta Beauty Media being the most recent one, or, whatever is out there to the framework, which we'll talk about here in a second. So, so talk about in your, how you went about the research. Did you talk to clients, or how did you sort of understand what was happening today, and how did you come up with the framework? What was the research process behind it?
Yeah, so we've reached out and spoke to about a dozen brands, both clients and outside of the company, and a couple of industry sort of experts as well. And we ask them, how are you doing this today within your company, or for clients that you might work with? What are the issues with that? And sort of prompted this thesis that we had at the time, which was let's think about things from a marketing funnel standpoint. And we at the time, it was the idea that we started with. We were open to be proved wrong. We were open to criticism of that. But just wanted to understand, how are people doing it today, and what are the big problems with that? And so that's a fairly small number of people to speak with, but the challenges that they each had were so similar. We felt pretty confident that we'd gotten a pretty broad perspective of the issues, and the fact that no one really feels like they have this that they have a good approach to this, that their current models of allocating retail media are really useful, or set up for a future where they, in fact, have more options on the menu.
And I think it's very understandable, right, that is the case, because this space is so new. I mean, Amazon advertising, of course, has been around for a number of years. But I think the new part of the ecosystem is that we have this just explosion in the number of different retail media networks, and omni-channel retailers are sort of requiring the spend, et cetera. So it's all, very new, particularly when we start looking across retailers and try to allocate budgeting. So what is happening today? Like when you talk to those clients, when you look out into the ecosystem, like what's happening today? How are they doing this currently?
Yeah, well, there's two main approaches, and there's some slight variations on this, but I'll talk about just the main two. One is to allocate by retailer, and this sort of follows the existing org structure and P&L structure for most traditional companies who sell across multiple retailers. And that is such that if a certain retailer represents a certain percentage of my sales each year, they get that requisite percentage of my budget. So if Amazon represents 10% of my sales, they'll get 10% of the ad budget. And that's a pretty easy structure to set up, because that's how the P&L is set up, that's how the teams are organized. So it makes sense to continue it that way. But the downside of that model is, one, it doesn't account for new platforms that pop up. You can't move very quickly with that kind of model. it doesn't account for these sort of quasi non-retailers like Instacart, who is not a retailer, so it doesn't fit into any of those boxes. So where does the ad budget come from there? And it sort of presupposes a type of channel loyalty or intra-channel behavior that doesn't really exist. Like today, shoppers are not just shopping through one channel, they're mixing and matching and switching channels depending on all kinds of things, and the path to purchase is really messy. So we don't really get to see that end-to-end journey within a channel anymore. Yeah. Do you want to explain the second model?
Second model, but I have an addition too, which is it also assumes that all retail media networks are equal in their ability to drive new to brand or for conversion or whatever. If you look at it just by a percentage of sales, it just assumes they all perform the same. They all have the same reporting capabilities. They all have the same ad unit types, which we know factually is not true. So that would be I think a fourth reason, as you were describing the other three reasons, is one of the drawbacks. So percentage of sales is one way. What is the second way that you found?
The second way is through performance metrics, and the most common one that brands use is ROAS, or return on ad spend. Metrics are easy to find. They're in your ad dashboard. Your managed services team, if you're using managed services at one of these networks, that's the first thing they'll put on your dashboard is ROAS. You can compare it across channels. So it kind of becomes this default metric. But I call that a very, very blunt instrument when it comes to actually figuring out your performance and how a certain channel is delivering. ROAS is really at its core a profitability kind of metric. It tells you how profitably you're driving sales. But for many brands, the main objective is not to manage to a certain contribution margin, it's to grow. So you think of all the, even brands with a lot of, that are sort of mature brands, they will still have new products that they're launching that they want to grow awareness for, right? So you don't want to be managing to a ROAS in that regard. And something that I like to explain, that we explain to clients at Bobsled is, look, we can produce any kind of ROAS that you want. If you want a ROAS of 20, we can do that, but it's going to be this really, we're only going to bid on long tail, branded, super obscure keyword that's going to essentially always convert. So we're not going to grow your reach through a super high ROAS. And so I think that's just a big sort of misdirection that a lot of brands end up going in, just because ROAS is easy to calculate, it's there, it's easy to compare. It's also just backward looking through the rearview mirror as well. It doesn't give you a sense of where might my shopper be exploring, new channels my shopper might actually be using and things like that.
So easy to calculate and sort of easy to compare, but limited in what it tells you, and therefore sort of like fundamentally flawed if that's the if that's like the metric that you're using.
Well, it can be a good metric if your focus is on profitability, even if that's a portion of your assortment is more mature in its life cycle, cash cows of your brand, then maybe you do want to focus on ROAS for those, but you don't want to focus on total ROAS across your whole brand or your whole assortment or a whole channel. That is going to be really placing an upper limit on growth for those products or sub brands that have a growth goal.
Okay, so the two most common ways that brands are allocating today are based on a percentage of sales. So how big are these accounts relative to each other for our business? and then also based on essentially relative ROAS to each other, and you'll spend more in a higher ROAS retail media network and less in a lower ROAS network. So that's how it's happening today. We talked about some of the cons of that. What do you see as a better way forward? Like, what is kind of the core of the framework that you're proposing?
Yeah, so we believe that brands should be allocating retail media budgets by funnel stage and not by platform or by metrics. So I alluded to this earlier as well. The universe of options, and this is another reason why it's overwhelming, is that there are so many ad types and targeting opportunities, particularly with Amazon, which we spend a lot of our time in as a channel. You've got the paid search ad types, of which there are many, and new targeting options and new bid modifiers and things like that. And then you've also got the DSP. There is so much that you can do, but bringing things back to the objective of the brand, the sub-brand, or the product. What is the real objective? Is it to grow market share, grow wallet share, or is it to be profitable and maintain a certain margin? So that's the first sort of the first kind of concept, and that foots pretty nicely to the marketing funnel, right? So top of funnel awareness, that if you're focusing on tactics that are going to help with awareness, that's really your growth objective at play. Towards the bottom of the funnel, that's where we're seeing really high conversion, high ROAS ad strategies. And so that foots to a profitability kind of model. And so the idea is to figure out which part of the funnel are we going to be focusing on for this particular brand, sub-brand product. And then looking at the universe of ad types and targeting options within that stage of the funnel, potentially across several different retailers or platforms as well, so that you're looking at a stage of the shopper journey and optimizing for that, rather than optimizing for the retailer spend level or performance, just looking at ROAS, for example.
What do you think? So it's kind of this shift from like a banners-based type approach to an outcomes-based type approach. Like, what are you trying to drive? Is sort of how I thought about it when I read your study. What do you think needs to happen for this type of framework to materialize in an organization? Like what needs to change?
That's a great question, and I think it's kind of easy for us to talk about this theoretical model where if you could wave a magic wand, we could put all your performance data into this model, and everyone would just start looking at the big picture and not what how their organization is currently set up. The truth is, it's quite a challenging concept for larger brands who have more traditional sales organizations, because you're really kind of disrupting the status quo here with this kind of model. I think where it can be effective is still to start reporting in this way and showing where the ad spend is actually taking place and looking at those metrics, how things are performing. Second thing that is still going to be able to visit today is looking at diving into what those objectives are. And we find with a lot of our clients, it's kind of unclear. Like we're being asked to optimize for this type of metric, but when we dig a little bit deeper, we find out the objective is something quite different. And really digging into what are we looking for this brand, and what are the objectives that really foot to that. And my colleague Matteo shared a good example about that middle of funnel stage, that consideration stage, one of the best metrics at that stage is clicks, for example. It's not conversion rate, it's not ROAS, it's clicks. It shows that people are clicking through to the product page and considering it. So that's sort of a back to basics kind of comment, but understanding what's the objective and what kind of metrics are going to effectively measure how we're doing there. Those are still things that you can add into reporting as it stands without necessarily disrupting the whole way that budgets are written next quarter.
I think a really powerful thing is even just to put in front of, in the framework, develop that table that shows awareness, consideration, purchase, and then loyalty and brand attention, and just like do that exercise. Like, what does that look like today? And then let's talk about it. And I think that then, and then I think if you layered in like Facebook spend and other media spend and put it into that same framework, I think that can be, another powerful way to at least just get the conversation going and present the data in a little bit of a different way. To your point about, the goals, that was going to be one of my follow-up questions for you is like, do companies have, in fact, clear goals in mind? I think in my experience, it can be a little bit muddied in terms of like, what are we trying to achieve? And I think retail media is a little funky in that we sort of like have a tendency to artificially constrain it into like retail when there are like real awareness building, capabilities. Amazon certainly, goes beyond Amazon's platform. Other retail media networks are moving in that direction as well. But I guess you would agree kind of with that statement that the goals are often like we need to work on understanding what is the goal.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. And there is a nice example in the paper about an initial traditional view of splitting out spend based by Amazon, Walmart, and Instacart. And then when we zoom out and we actually look at the stage and then the retailer, we can see some interesting things. Like, it's actually better with a conversion kind of goal. It's better to actually be spending at this stage with this retailer and switching stages to another retailer based on some of those metrics. So there was a little bit more, I forget, I might get the retailers mixed up, but there was a little bit more consideration happening at one of the retailers that came at a better value. So you're able to see, which retailers are good at driving value at various stages based on what outcome you're looking for.
I think too, like as I read the report and talking to you now, this is all complex, right? There's a ton of moving pieces. There's a lot going on. And that's the other challenge for organizations is that when it comes to retail media, because it's so new, I would describe it as they're generally a bit understaffed. I think really in just the last, years, 2 years, maybe we started to see like real dedicated retail media roles, setting aside Amazon advertising, but I'm saying, people that are dedicated to some of these other channels. So it's just a very complex thing. And maybe part of it's just educating, senior teams about the importance of it, why it's important, which for no other reason, your big omnichannel customers are sort of like requiring you to participate in it. So that's reason enough.
Yeah.
But I think, that is, that's part of the challenge. Did you come across that type of commentary amongst the brands that you spoke with?
Yeah, 100%. And that is a big challenge, is getting some buy-in from executives around looking outside of that standard P&L structure. And one thing that we're fortunate to do, because we were speaking with real practitioners on the brand side with this, is we're able to gather a lot of tips and tactics that have worked for other brands to actually start to get buy-in, and what type of reporting to share and how to sort of start to break down those silos. So as this white paper is quite theoretical with that framework, and I think you could take it in a couple of different directions, but we also tried to bring it down to earth a little bit with some of the tactical tips that are included in it that are from real e-commerce directors.
Well, I think with studies like that, it's always going to be difficult to be real prescriptive because, it's, people from different categories are reading this, et cetera. So I kind of like the nature of it, which is, I think it's in a sense, a discussion starter with a framework prescription rather than like saying, okay, do, X, Y, and Z per se. So I think it is more powerful as a result.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, some of the questions that we got in our webinar when we initially presented it was, what software tool are you using to do this? And it's there isn't one. I mean, we use our ad tech provider, which is PackView, and we sort of had to sort of modify it a little bit. There isn't a really clean prescriptive way of doing this, and there certainly isn't software that's able to do this very well. You do kind of need to modify this in a way that's going to suit you. I mean, just the 3 retailers that we used in the report, Amazon, Instacart, and Walmart, that's pretty unlikely to be the full range of retailers that any one brand is working with. You're either likely to be working with more or less than that. So yes, it is a starting point and a guide.
By the time this video is published, your research will have been out for a couple of weeks. You've done a podcast, you've done a webinar. As you've gotten feedback on the study, what percentage of brands would you say follow this framework more or less today?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, it was sort of surprising to see that there are very few today. There were a couple in our interview process where their existing framework sort of replicated this, but not entirely.
If you had just said 0, I would have shaken my head because I think right, like
it may be
right, like somewhere kind of.
But we've started using this framework with our clients. And Matteo is an account manager running paid media for clients, and he's rolled this out to 2 of his clients. They've each seen a 10 to 20% increase in their branded search volume over the last 4 months while he's put this into place for them, which was a key metric. So we're rolling this out to our clients. We're seeing really strong results right now, which is good. So I know it's not 0. It's at least 3.
And does this framework guide sort of how you're approaching clients at this point, at least?
In our recommendations to them, certainly, yeah. And it's the way we're even sort of when we're speaking with prospective clients as well. Often we'll be asked to provide spend projections and performance projections, and we're putting that into this model now as well.
Now, I know this won't be the last research report on retail media that you ever published. So you put together this framework, you published this study. What future research questions do you think are important for the industry to answer after doing this one?
Well, you and I, Russ, are going to be working on something together pretty soon about sort of the savviness of brands on Amazon in particular, and what elements are sort of required to be successful on Amazon from a two-sided perspective. One is their capabilities and their ability to get things done, and also their willingness to get things done as well. Unfortunately, some brands are in the camp of the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And others, there's really just no kind of executive buy-in, and nothing's ever really going to get done, even if the people on the front line are keen and able. They can't really get any buy-in. Nothing's really going to happen. So that's actually coming up pretty soon. We're going to be working on that together. And then later on this year, I'm going to be working on a piece that's more around the incremental effect of promotions, and like coupons and prime deals and different coupon and promo types across the different retailers. How does that actually affect your organic rank and share of voice and things like that? So I think that's not what I necessarily called retail media, but it's certainly promotion, looking at promotions and what kind of effect they have on business outcomes.
And that's very important, right? And I know, like in the omnichannel world, a lot of brands are trying to figure out, do we do a price promotion in store? Do we spend more money on retail media? So there's all this complexity. So I think that'll add to the, conversation in the industry. And my hope is that the willingness is going to be there and is going to grow. We're entering a very interesting time economically, and with digital comps coming down as the comps from last year were quite difficult as well. So, we'll see how it evolves from here. But certainly this is just a very rich, new area for the industry to explore. And I think, like I led off with, I think your study, takes us a step further into understanding, what does good look like. So thanks for putting the report together. Thanks. And thanks for joining me today. For those watching, where should they go to follow your research and insights and content you create?
Yeah, you can find this report specifically. I'm sure you'll link up to it, Ross, but if you go to bobsledmarketing.com, we've got a section called Learn, and we've got all of our resources there. Subscribing to our newsletter is a great idea. We put out a lot of content. And then you could also follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active pretty much every day, like Ross, hanging out, making nuisances of ourselves, stirring the pot a little bit sometimes. So connect with me on LinkedIn too.
Awesome, Kiri. Well, thanks again for joining me, and good luck with Acadia and the new acquisition, your new role and everything. So thanks again.
Thank you.